Hello, friends. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. I'm your host, James Dice. Each week, I fire questions at the leaders of the smart buildings industry to try to figure out where we're headed and how we can get there faster without all the marketing fluff. I'm pushing my learning to the limit, and I'm so glad to have you here following along. Episode 63 is a conversation with Ryan Morris, Chairman and CEO of Turntide Technologies, and another special guest, Marti Ogram, Director of Sales Automation at Turntide and former co-founder of Riptide. We talked about Turntide's efficient software-defined motor technology. Then we took a bit of a deep dive into Turntide's recent acquisition of Riptide, why they did it, how it complements the motor offering, and where the combined company is headed with their new software platform. And did I continue my streak of 2 truths and a lie success? Listen to the end if you want to find out. Without further ado, please enjoy Nexus Podcast episode 63. Hey, hello, Ryan. Hello, Marti. Welcome to the Nexus Podcast. Can you introduce yourselves, please, starting with Ryan?
Hey, I'm Ryan Morris. I'm the CEO at Turntide Technologies.
All right, now I'm Marti Ogram. I am running up sales at Turntide now and their automation group. And I was one of the co-founders of Riptide that was acquired by Turntide just about 4 months ago.
Awesome.
For happiness.
Yes, for your happiness. So what I typically do is start with background before you're at your current company. So let's start with you, Ryan. Before you were CEO of Turntide, what'd you do and what brought you into the smart buildings industry?
So I got into it, well, the original spark that motivated me that now is Turntide is I actually learned about nuclear fusion when I was 11. And so there was this seed of like, we can save the world with technology.
Okay.
that goes way back. And so that got me really into software and physics and energy and all that kind of stuff. So it goes pretty early. But career-wise, I'm a software engineer by background, operations research and information engineering. But I started a software company after college. And then actually I was running a company that did really high power conversion for electric vehicle going back for 50 years. I got involved in the company and then worked to really transform it. And that's what kind of got me really deep into the world of electric motors and drivetrains and kind of high power conversion, high power electronics, which my co-founder of my first software company did his PhD in that. So I had always deep respect for how challenging things are when you have a shoebox sized thing that puts as much power as an entire apartment building through it, controlled 20,000 times a second. This is not to be trifled with. So that's what I was doing before Turntide. And that got me into, electric motor technology and switch reluctance motors, and eventually led me to really build Turntide starting a bit over 4 years ago now.
Cool. Very exciting. So I saw on your LinkedIn that you have some sort of keto nutrition bar company on the side. What's that?
That's my side hustle that with my wife actually. So it means cute little squirrel in Russian.
Okay.
From Belarus, but I try to eat really healthy, low carb. So it's kind of like Kind bars, but with no sugar and tastes a lot better. So if you eat that like during the day at work, you will guaranteed 2x productivity.
2x. All right. That sounds quantifiable. That's awesome. All right, Marti, how about you? Before Riptide, what were you doing and how'd you get into the industry?
Sure. So I've spent my whole career in sort of the intersection of real estate and technology. And I almost can't count how long ago I got involved with sort of when building equipment met the internet. And it was really about 2 or 3 years after Tritium started. So that really dates me in terms of the beginning days of smart buildings. And along that way, I got involved with a startup group that was based in Santa Barbara that got me hooked into Santa Barbara. And we ended up with a technology that, well, in a very similar approach, was out to integrate in building systems. And instead of making ourselves look like a building automation system, which is what Tritium did, of course, and sell to Honeywell, we decided to make ourselves look like more of a building network appliance and sold to Cisco Systems in 2009. So at Cisco, I stayed around in that group, the Smart Connected Real Estate Group, and I ran global business development, getting us going with some of Cisco's top customers across the globe. And then that journey led us to deciding to solve more of the application layer problems that we saw out in the market. And many of us that were on that journey jumped off the Cisco bus and started Riptide and really focused on the cloud-based building management side, not so much as the edge, although we of course did some edge stuff, and then acquired by Turntide just this year.
Awesome. So were you at Cisco when John Petsy was there?
Actually, I was part of that committee to say, who could we get in the industry that would really make noise? And we said, John Petsy, let's go get him. So I actually reported to John, developed a great relationship with him. And when he decided to leave and start SkySpark, I was like, well, okay, something's happening here. Maybe we need to think. So he was a bit of a catalyst.
Oh, that's awesome.
For us on the Riptide side to also think sort of beyond the Cisco walls.
Got it. I know John will listen to this episode, so he'll be happy to hear that if he doesn't already know.
Yes, well, big fan. It was interesting because we had in a lot of ways followed Tritium. And so then to sit at the same side of the table and learn all the inside of how things were, it was a great time. So yeah, I enjoy watching John's career.
Awesome. And yeah, we're going to dig into Riptide on the software side of it in a little bit. Let's talk about software motor company though, and motors real quick though, Ryan. So can you talk about the founding of the company and sort of get into why these motors are better than your traditional HVAC motors that we get off the shelf?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll tell it from my history. So I first learned about switch reluctance motors in the context of working on electric vehicle drivetrains, where in particular, you really need permanent magnets, rare earth magnets from China, if you want to get really good performance. And that's what basically everybody has converged around. I mean, Tesla originally was named Tesla because they use AC induction motors, but they, like everybody else, have gone to the rare earth magnet for the better performance. And so when I first learned about switch reluctance motors about 7.5 years ago, I sort of look at the world through this lens of compute or Moore's law, like how do you abstract things to their information essence? Mm-hmm. And it just seemed, very quickly like, wow, here's this kind of limit function of the simplest mechanical motor that can be made. And okay, so why hasn't that become the dominant form of technology? Like you've had AC induction motors basically be the standard since 1888 when Nikola Tesla created them. Mm-hmm. And there's still the vast majority of motors today. Like there's not enough rare earth magnets in the world to replace them all with really high performance magnet motors. And so the problem was, though, they hadn't been able to be controlled really efficiently in the past. It required too much computing power to kind of design the motor and to shape the current going into it. It's like trying to ride a bicycle backwards. And so this just sort of smelled like a compute problem to me. And, my, general trend that I always follow is like, how is Moore's law going to open up more capabilities over time in different areas? It's fairly, very predictable, if not the most predictable trend in human development. And so I started looking around the whole world of who's working on this technology. It was mostly in academia. So my spark was, okay, switch reluctance is clearly going to have a really important role to play in the future for the world of motors. And motors consume like half the electricity in the entire world. And that's only going to increase with electric vehicles to probably 2/3 over time. And I literally scoured the entire planet of who's working on this, who has the IP in this. And it's mostly people in academia. So there weren't really companies who had really cracked this at scale or in any practical commercializable way. There've been some attempts in like nuclear reactor cooling pumps because they're super reliable. Because they're so simple, they're very fault tolerant. So they've been kind of very niche, mining nuclear reactor pumps and stuff like that. But then there was this technology, this IP that originally spun out of university in 2007. So Piyush Desai, who's still with us as a head motor designer, he had this idea of basically taking the original idea around switch reluctance, which is a very old concept, and kind of inverting it and doing the geometry kind of backwards from what would normally make sense. And it turns out this was actually the physical optimal, geometry for it. And so patented that and spun out into a startup that was kind of the predecessor to SMC. And then in 2013, SMC had a kind of a reboot as IoT became feasible. And the idea was basically to pair the smart motor, which inherently has to be controlled digitally. It's like a sort of digital programmable native design, with the IoT capabilities of making. So it was actually around the same time as Riptide got started with a different angle. And so I got introduced to the team at SMC while I was working on electric vehicle drivetrain technology, and I guess beginning of 2017. And it was basically a research project, but it made some really big breakthroughs over the, literally a decade they've been working on this. And they had cracked a lot of the key problems, especially around the software control, which is kind of the hardest part around it. So after 10 years of working, they were like, oh my God, it works finally. And I was like, let's go, I want to go build it into a really huge company. And they're like, great, you do it and pay for it. So that's sort of how I joined. So when it was like 9 people, I think, at the time. And so I basically joined to grow it to be a big company. And we rebranded as Turntide a bit over a year ago to reflect that it's, really about more than just the motor. The motor is the core of all these systems that consume energy. That's the thing at the sort of atomic, electron level that's actually using the energy for something useful. But it's really about the bigger system to, turn the tide on climate change is, the name.
Okay. Got it. That's a fascinating story about you doing all your own research and then going to find the, the researchers out there that are holding the right patents and solving the right problems already. That's really cool.
Yeah, I have a thing for really hard problems. So if somebody tells me a problem's really hard, normally that like scares people away. For me, it's like, it's hard for everybody. So like, let's be the only one that does it.
Nice. I love that. So if I'm like the average listener to this podcast, they're used to sort of probably walking into a building, right? Going to the mechanical room, see the motor sit on the floor, find the VFD on the wall. One of those connects to the control system, right? Or the VFD typically connects to the control system, usually some other relay that turns the, the pump or whatever, the fan on and off. How has that setup changed and how you guys, go to market with the new motors?
Well, in the abstract, you still have the same basic pieces. So you have a box with electronics, and then you have a piece of metal that is the motor.
Okay.
So that part is the same. It's down inside. In the abstract, when you have electronics and a piece of metal that turn into electricity into motion, we're inventing things, and we have over 100 patents that are, really inside the system. So they're abstracted away from the user, and it's all about how we control the current. And like the motor, like if you took apart the motor, it looks totally different than a conventional motor inside. It's actually much simpler. And the complexity is really in the firmware and the subtlety of the design. But there's kind of fewer failure modes. There's just, the coils are much, much simpler. The rotor is just a simple piece of steel. So like there's nothing that can really fail. So the motor itself is dead simple, but there's a lot of complexity in the firmware, which is shaping the current 20,000 times a second going into the motor, making it output the right torque, speed, or power at the best efficiency and over a pretty wide range. So from a actual use case perspective, you're going to have the BMS or whatever instructing the electric machine, so the electronics in the motor, hey, what speed do you want me to run at? What power up do you want me to run at? What torque? There's a bunch of upstream benefits that we can then take out of the motor because we need to control it so precisely. We also get a bunch of data feeding back to the kind of control system, which is where Riptide kind of comes in for the broader building. So you can do things like sensing torque, there's a bunch of areas that we're just getting into, but because we are effectively software defined hardware, you're not like trying to slap on a bunch of sensors that each have their own failure modes on an existing mechanical system. It's really reinvented from the ground up, to be a digital first, a software first DNA of the motor system itself. So it's a very different architecture. But in terms of installing it, like there's same boxes to sort of hook up the wires and bolts and stuff.
Yeah.
For a fan or a pump.
Cool. So if I'm designing a new building right now, why as a designer might I spec out this motor versus a different one?
Biggest reason is efficiency. So we can get into the stats, but against a constant speed motor that you see still very commonly. California for new building, you have to have variable speed Title 24, but against constant speed, we're saving like 65% on average. It's probably 60% of that is from the variable speed. And then the other 40% is if you had like a top of the line AC induction motor and a VFD, you'd get an additional, big savings because it's more efficient at every operating point. And in particular, switch reluctance, it's very flat efficiency curve. So because it's digitally controlled, you're basically just pulsing in current when it makes useful torque. It's, even if you're at partial load, it'll maintain very high efficiency versus induction motor, it will fall off quite a lot.
Yeah. So at lower speeds, you're not very efficient versus constant efficiency down at no matter what speed you're flowing.
Yeah. So we haven't really focused on new construction so much yet. We've been doing more retrofit. Yeah, the idea is you can go replace the existing motor and then add intelligent control. So conceptually, it's very similar to a VFD upgrade, but just better efficiency, and then it's going to be a lot more reliable. The motor will last a lot longer than a conventional motor.
Very cool. Very cool. And then, like you said, it seems like there are more analytics that can be done, even though, like you said, less failure points, right? Less ways for this motor to fail, but there's still more data coming off of it than your typical, speed get off of another VFD or whatever. Okay, cool. Very good. So help me then understand. So you guys as a company focusing on motors, you had your own software as well. Why bring in the Riptide team next? What was behind that?
Yeah, so we from the beginning, 2013, since SMC was kind of the reboot of the predecessor, the idea was, okay, how do we make the thing that the motor is in really efficient and also intelligent? As that IoT kind of capability set started making that feasible, and then really in earnest at kind of late 2017, we started thinking like, hey, what does like a next generation of building management look like? There's 90% of smaller buildings really don't have anything today. Like existing BMSs are, you've talked about some other podcasts, you've done a great job at, bringing this content forward, but they're kind of analogous to like mainframe type systems. Like they work great for big systems, but you need like a full-time, control technician. And so it was pretty clear that all these sort of cell phone stack IoT type things are eventually going to enable all these next generation BMS systems. So we were really, on our way building that, and then came across Riptide. We looked at a lot of other players in the space actually, as, was there a way that we could sort of team up and accelerate the whole offering? And then Riptide in particular stood out because they had really thought about the problem philosophically really similar to us and had a lot of similarities in their sort of core technical stack. And like, it was all really modern and everything. A lot of the other, smaller companies, and there were a lot of them, going back 10 years that started and maybe found little niches, but, hadn't built something that would really scale. I call those engineering cul-de-sacs, where it's like, a great little neighborhood, but doesn't really go anywhere. So Riptide had really built it in a very scalable kind of platform way. And so, it was clear that having the capabilities together was kind of where we were definitely going. And, we were able to, meet the team and really liked each other. We have a really unique culture at the company, which happy to hear Marti talk about it since she's, been exposed now. But, I think, we were really aligned sort of philosophically on the architecture and how we thought about the market, and then culturally with the people. So it just worked out pretty well.
Cool. I want to hear from Marti too, but I want to first ask Marti, can you take us back? It sounds like when you were at Cisco, you were familiar with Tritium.
Yep.
Don kind of educated you on Tritium and how the Niagara platform worked, right? It seems like you guys took that to the next level when you started Riptide. Can you talk about founding the company and kind of
Sure.
what problems you guys solved early on and where the progression went from there?
Yeah. So I always think of Cisco as our silent investor because we really started the company bootstrapping off of the customers that we won as Cisco, who, of course, Cisco has reach into, some of the biggest companies on the planet that have sizable portfolios. And we would be very successful at getting their buildings wired up, but then it would all go back to, gee, it's Black Friday. I want to change my schedules. How am I doing this, Cisco? I have to hit one of your mediator boxes one by one. That's not going to help me. And so we saw that there was this application layer that was sort of outside of Cisco's traditional tech stack. And about that time, Dave Leinbrock, who's our CTO, who's really I'll give him all the credit for being the true technologist. He's unique in that he is a technologist at heart, computer science background, but he funded his computer science education by working as a HVAC tech.
Oh, wow.
And in the building control. So he had one leg in that business as real know-how. Anyway, about this time that we got this exposure to, what are we going to do about when you have a customer that has 3,000 sites or 5,000 sites? That was the real state. That wasn't hypothetical. How do you manage them? Dave at that time was working with Cisco with some of their distinguished engineers, looking at cloud computing, looking at big data. And it was clear to him that the client server stack that almost all BMS systems, including Tritium, were built on, we're after a new wave here. And so he said, well, if we're going to solve the problem for the large enterprises that have lots of buildings, let's not put some server stack that handles region one. Let's really do it right. And, kind of rallied us because we felt very comfortable that we had a known problem set with a customer group that had appetite and investment. So we jumped off and started, and with the blueprint that Dave had in mind, we went to Cisco's top customers and said, we heard you, we're here to help you. How do you like this? And by the way, will you help fund it by almost by professional services? And so we look like a professional services company for the first couple of years, building our tech stack and delivering for those customers. And we really had a hit ratio of every single one that we went to. We went to the top 3 and they all said, yes, we're in. And so it's how we got the company started. So we're a little different than some of the other sort of startups that were tackling the small and medium building product, because we started, our day one requirement was a customer who had 3,000 sites.
Yeah.
So everything that Dave Leinbrock, and by the way, we were also very fortunate. We grabbed some of the prime Cisco engineers that we had that like to solve new problems, and they jumped on board with us. And that team, starting the tech stack they built, really started that middle layer at the IoT cloud, almost looking at those days as an application enablement platform. And then we struggled. We said, okay, what are we going to do with the edge? Like, we've solved this with a Cisco mediator. Tritium has solved this. This is really a solved problem. Do we want to be solving solved problems, or we want to do new? And we debated that quite a bit, but we came to the conclusion that we really needed to solve the edge for the cloud and optimize for the cloud. Okay. And of course, if you've done something a couple of times, and hopefully you do it a lot faster. So we dual tracked sort of our own edge with everything that we had learned from our mediator days, with optimizing for the cloud, and we built on our own IoT cloud platform. And in those days, there was no IoT Azure stack, so there was a lot of stuff that we were doing that now maybe show up in, and maybe if you're with Google Cloud or Microsoft. After those iterations, and we started breaking down more on the application layer and building both a web app and a mobile app. And again, we designed it day one for what do you do when you have thousands of sites, and it's across a region with all kinds of stakeholders. So that was the genesis of how we got started. And it was really much off of leveraging all that learnings and valuable customer from Cisco.
Absolutely. You're hinting at the answer to this question, but I just wanted to let you answer it directly for people that don't understand. How is what you built different than the legacy style architecture of a BMS?
Yeah, it is definitely a computing story, in the sense of, as all computing waves, Ryan mentioned mainframe and then moving to the client server. And we are obviously in not only a cloud, but a mobile era. And the traditional, our big 5 BMS that are built around the client server for the obvious reasons of the era that they were designed, I would say it's a bit surprising to me that they haven't moved faster onto the cloud, that it does seem, I always say that us in the BMS industry, we seem to cycle 10 years behind the true IT tech space, and it does feel like that. But our originating differentiation was truly all the cloud advantages. So long-term storage of data, solving the security problem and making easy access. And then of course, enabling a mobile environment. That's really where I would say, in frankness, our differentiation was really leaning on the advantages of cloud.
Yeah, anyone that's ever logged onto a BMS remotely and they get a phone call 2 minutes later, hey, you kicked me off. They understand that you don't have multi-tenancy with legacy systems. You don't have long-term data storage. When you change the schedule, you have to go to that controller locally, either log into it remotely or go there physically to change the schedule. That schedule doesn't apply globally because it doesn't know what the other sites are doing. So it's definitely resonating with me as I'm hearing it from you, for sure. Very cool.
And when we were at Cisco, our core routers and switch team, if they had a router and switch in one of the customers at more than 5 years, the sales team's fired, right? You have a very short tech cycle of swapping out. And in the BAS industry, I was with a customer in LA that had a KMC system that was put in 15 years ago. And, it's still running. So maybe with some Band-Aids, but that's part of the reality, which is why, as you well know, across the market, even companies that have invested in building automation are not at an optimal state. And that is, a sad state of the industry. So I really like the buildings without BMS, but there's a lot of pain in the buildings that have BMS. So
yeah, definitely.
You're right there. But the bottom line, it is first and foremost sort of the general tech innovation wave that we followed on.
Totally. Hey guys, just another quick note from our sponsor, Nexus Labs, and then we'll get back to the show. This episode is brought to you by Nexus Foundations, our introductory course on the smart buildings industry. If you're new to the industry, this course is for you. If you're an industry vet but want to understand how technology is changing things, this course is also for you. The alumni are raving about the content, which they say pulls it all together, and they also loved getting to meet the other students on the weekly Zoom calls and in the private chat room. You can find out more about the course at courses.nexuslabs.online. All right, back to the interview. So Ryan, how does this then, when you acquired Riptide, how does coupling that, I'm picturing like a energy efficiency upgrade where you go in, you do all the motors, right? Swap out the motors, you have energy savings that are produced. It seems like a really beneficial thing to then also come in the same project and say, well, let's do the BMS at the same time. Is that kind of part of the thinking?
Yeah, basically. I mean, there's a certain threshold of materiality, energy savings. One of the issues with energy savings, energy efficiency is that while it may be civilization's largest collective problem for any individual business, it's like their 12th biggest problem.
Yeah,
because you've all got your revenue and cost of goods sold are probably the biggest line item, or your headcount or something.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think everybody wants to do better, but they only have a certain amount of management executive bandwidth to focus on it. And so you really need to, I think, be able to bundle a material enough value together as an offering. And so the nice thing we have with motors is that, motors typically consume even 2 or 3 times more than all the lighting. And so, LED lighting paved the way for all those sort of hardware energy efficiency upgrades. It's just like physically useless energy to do the same thing. So basically the same principle with the motors. Like, it still moves as much air as before, but it's using a lot less input electrons to do that. And so the idea is, okay, these buildings either have a really poor BMS or usually just don't have any BMS. And so clearly there's an opportunity to go incrementally add even more value if you can go make the whole building intelligent versus just the individual HVAC units. So that was kind of the thesis of building out this whole offering that, we continue to develop. Like, we're not all the way finished with that yet, but this is a big step for people.
Totally. Well, I'm not sure which one of you to ask about this, but you guys are now going to come out with the Turntide software platform, right? And I'm assuming it's, Riptide advanced, building on Riptide, right? And so can you talk about like what that's going to look like and where that's, where you guys are headed on the software application side of things? So
certainly you hit the first right out the gate. The key is make our smart motor system wrapped with an application better and stronger as a combined offering. And that much, we pretty much have checked the box of completing that. And you'll now see a fully branded Turntide application, which is super exciting. One of the things that, of course, with a cloud advantage, we've been amassing data assets across rooftop units for a long time, but with our, I'll say, sort of bootstrap Riptide style, we've been unable to really execute on optimizing or building insights on that data assets. And since the acquisition, the talent that Turntide has brought in on the product team around insights and automation, and has an entire product group called Insights and Automation, cool. And firing up data scientists now to leverage the data assets. And then, of course, bringing the motor into the story, I think is the part that I'm most excited about on what you're going to see coming out of Turntide. So there will be a strong focus towards going to that next layer. I think we are doing a great job on the monitoring, management, and control side. So what can we do now on bringing insights that really drive improved serviceability, all the wish lists that we have and we talk about, I'm sure, on many of your podcasts as well. I think that's probably the best. We're doing some nice incremental improvements on adding in more systems, adding better alerts adding in alerts around the motor system. But it's really the insight and automation, I think, is going to be the most exciting part.
Very cool. So things like FDD and analytics. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, that's right. And we've done some partnerships with godfathers that have been writing papers on FDD for about 12 years, lending with our data and lending with some of the talent that Turntide has brought on. So it's not us by ourselves. It's a combination of having that data. And I'll tell you, that's where I feel rather confident that we can get ahead, because unfortunately, when the big players have sort of missed the cloud boat, it means they're missing the data asset boat. And, even though Riptide, we still maintain being a small company. We've had, thousands of RTU assets under management now for many years. And there aren't a lot of the larger OEM BMS makers that have really been accumulating data assets. So you can't do a lot of insights if you don't have a lot of data, and of course, organized data and all those things that, So yes, that's the part I would say I'm most excited about.
I mean, what's getting me excited hearing you talk about it is the ability to tightly couple the analytical insights with the control sequences, schedules, set points, all that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And what Turntide gives us an opportunity that was not really economically feasible is access up to the roof. And, we focus mostly on sort of below the roof. And yes, we would put smart thermostats in that were using the pre-existing wiring, but getting on the roof, having installers go up, put on sensors in the machine, directly connected machine. I mean, these get to be a little more expensive for your first cost. So, enter Turntide, they're driving forward with a smart motor, bringing all the value of that efficiency. They're already up there. To add a few more additive sensors in that ECM is way different than us with our ECM and now, getting a whole new team up on the roof. So I think what we'll see is that the insight and analytics that we can bring is really going to power up these almost stranded assets. I mean, they're not fully stranded assets with rooftop units, but they're largely unconnected and not tied back to whoever is responsible for the proper care and feeding of them, mostly the HVAC service teams, who aren't connected to the BMS either. So it's that angle for the service that we can now unlock there for the rooftop that I think is going to be a game changer.
Cool. Anything to add to that, Ryan?
Well, one thing, and your podcast has been great at highlighting, a lot of other players and there's been a lot of great work in the analytics field, but there's two issues with that. Is you're presuming, I have a machine learning background. So you're presuming you have good data to do good analytics, first of all. And then you're presuming, okay, I can do something with that, assumed correct analytical insight. And the problem is, unless if you're in a big building where you have a complex, well-maintained building management system like that would be the case, that you can go take the data out of it and it's reliable, and then you can send a signal back to change the set points or something. But to actually get this kind of closed loop where you can reliably get good data out of the natively intelligent machines, which the smart motors are from the ground up, and then getting that into an analytical framework that then you can do something about and actually change the control. So that kind of bidirectional cloud native control loop, I thought that was a problem that over and over again I saw. Either the pure analytics guys would have all these great data scientists, but then they're like, oh, we don't want to touch the controls, we don't want to take responsibility for that part. Or then the controls guys were, just a different field. So, I don't see a lot of other great examples where you get that closed loop where you can really solve the problem and translate into action. And so that was a big, thing that we saw coming together with Riptide. We could, really be in a position to solve that all the way. Because at the end of the day, if you do analytics and it requires a human to go out and go change the thing every week, I mean, nobody's going to do that. It's got to be easy and automated.
Totally. So I think there's an announcement coming. Maybe it already has come, or maybe it'll come by the time we publish this. but is this new platform have a name, and would you guys like to talk about what the new name is?
Really, I think of it as a positioning around Turntide Technologies for Sustainable Operations as an umbrella position for where really Turntide is. I mean, as you've heard the story from Ryan, the motor was sort of the original centerpiece, but the focus is that ongoing sustainable operating environment for, efficiency, not just of the motor, but anywhere that we can touch and add more value. So that idea of sustainability and sustainable operations, we definitely see as the place for Turntide. And if we think about sustainability, I think the first time I went to a conference that there was somebody with a sustainability title was probably about 15, 17 years ago. And there was an early wave of what sustainability, and it's kind of like a C-level title, and they had a sort of a lane. And now it is company wide, and it is about the viability of the company in every single direction. So I think what you see Ryan doing a great job in all the acquisitions that continues is more of a sustainable operating theme, and bringing technologies that bring sustainable operations into the reach of companies everywhere. That's really becomes the company mission. So what we are doing from an application layer is just, that wrapper for any kind of high efficiency, whether it is on the transport side, on the ag side, and making sure that it's always intelligent and always enabling better operations. So that is the theme that you're going to be seeing coming out from Turntide very soon.
Very cool. Well, I've seen a bunch of announcements recently. You mentioned Ryan's been busy, it seems like. Ryan, do you want to share all these recent announcements? I've seen project funding, Turntide Transport, and a couple of acquisitions over in the UK. Can you talk about kind of where the company's expanding beyond buildings?
Sure. Yeah, we've really had an opportunity to pull a lot of pieces of the vision forward. I mean, these are all things that we've kind of had on our roadmap to address things that move, basically. So we have transport and built environment are kind of the two halves of our world. And like I mentioned, my previous company was in this space doing really high performance, what I call long tail electrification. So there's Tesla and everybody trying to scramble to catch up to Tesla doing the high volume passenger vehicle stuff. But literally everything that moves is going to electrify over time. And there's actually incredibly challenging engineering in making those high power drivetrains. It's not like making a software app or something. I mean, these are hard tech, software driven hardware, high power. And so there's very scarce talent for this. And frankly, most of that talent has been hoovered up by the big guys to try to catch up to Tesla. And so it's left this really big void for basically everything else that moves. So whether that's like automated warehouse robots, or commercial vehicles, or marine, like we're in Hitachi Rail, Ocado as customers being accelerated by part of this. So we really see we're not focused on like the residential kind of consumer space. Like we're trying to help companies make their whole operation sustainable, and there's definitely commercial vehicles and aspects to that, things that move where we have really unique IP, unique technology advantages, and unique skill sets. There's a lot of overlap in a lot of the core technologies. I mean, the switch reluctance motor, the core architecture that we have, is really the promise to ending the need for rare earth metals, which is not so much an issue for buildings because you're not as like weight sensitive in a building. But when you're in a vehicle and you need like really light, high power density motor, the only way to get that today is with rare earth magnets or with our switch reluctance motor that still has a ways to go until it's sort of universally applicable for vehicles. I think that's probably a few years more development to be sort of ubiquitous in applications. But yeah, I mean, it's all about being able to achieve whatever the goal is with fewer resources, sort of substituting all the material, mechanical costs with software complexity that kind of doesn't rust. You make it once and you can tweak it.
Totally. So essentially, if I like state it back to you, each industry needs obviously better motors, software to monitor whatever the assets are, and the insights might change across the industries. If you're talking about like a dairy farm compared to an office building, those are different insights, different stakeholders, different users, probably.
Different mammals, yeah.
Different animals, absolutely. But you guys are looking at like the layer underneath all of that can sort of go across all, like for a corporation, whatever type of building, whatever type of asset they have, being the infrastructure to make it more sustainable?
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do to make it ubiquitous. So we've got spots that we are just focused on in the initial phases, of course. But yeah, it's really, the way I describe it is to be the full stack for the long tail. So, we're not going to go compete with Honeywell or something, or Borg Warner on, their core turf. Those are gigantic companies that have to go after big markets in the initial phases to make it to work. But, the reason we chose dairy was because it's a fairly niche market that we could really demonstrate the power of this complete digital sustainable transformation. Although you don't call it sustainable in dairy because there's political things there, but we're learning. But efficient operations across the board. It's just about eliminating waste ultimately. But the way you do that is sort of surprisingly with common components across what appear to be very wide range of things. But at the end of the day, mammals in conditioned air, like in the abstract, like there's a lot of commonality in the problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yes, it's happy cows, high yield plants, happy shoppers, right? Healthy patients, successful students, all with an underlying core of a more efficient equipment being more managed to better outcomes. And yes, the driver was the uniform driver on the build side is that environmental piece, but it is kind of fun to learn the difference about what a cow what makes a cow happy versus successful students, but it's the same thing, same stack.
Absolutely. Really cool. All right. Anything else to add before we move on to our fun round of two truths and a lie?
Well, I don't know. I'm curious. I mean, you're like immersed in this space. Like who else do you think is really interesting? We're looking to partner with people, by the way. Like we're not trying to like own this space or something like that. Like we're really trying to be a platform that helps other really amazing technologies get to market faster. I mean, that's in a way like what happened with Riptide is we had sort of a platform to help bring material benefit to a bunch of customers. And we're massively accelerating the development with Riptide, both on a go-to-market and also on a technology development perspective.
Yeah.
So I just think my view personally is this whole space has to change over the next 10, 20 years. I mean, it has to become modernized. It has to become automated. Like you just don't have there's not enough people going through complex control technician schools or something to make every building intelligent. Like you got to solve this with technology in some way. But I don't know, I'm curious, like what else do you think of who you've talked to, I'm sure in your podcast by now, but who else is out there that you think is sort of aligned with this philosophy mission?
I don't want to make anyone mad by not mentioning them or
watch all my last 200 episodes.
Yeah. I think from a like philosophical standpoint, when you have like, and you guys are hitting on these points that I'm about to make already, when you have a dairy farm, there are certain problems that they need solved, like you said, to make a happy cow. I think of that like a whole product needs to be provided to them that meets their needs, right? And like you said, a full stack for the long tail. I love that. A full stack has to be provided, but my perspective on the industry after talking to all these people is that there are portions of that full stack where some people have like really solved and they're really far ahead on. And so I think I put my weight behind the people that are saying, oh, X, Y, and Z has solved that piece. Let's go partner with them. Kind of like you just said. I think those philosophies are the ones that I'm sort of promoting out there. I don't want to talk about anyone specifically because I'll definitely get too many emails and LinkedIn messages if I say the wrong thing. But I do like the philosophy that you're talking about. So cool. Let's do it then. Ryan, you're the one that's gonna go on the hot seat for two truths and a lie.
All right. So I say three things and two are true. One's a lie. You have to guess. That's
yeah.
Okay. All right. Marty, come on, you got to step up here. Do it. Okay, I'll give you three things. So I worked as a roughneck in the Northern Alberta oil patch. I went to the original Burning Man and I led a New York Stock Exchange company at age 27.
What is a roughneck?
It's like working in the oil fields. And
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask follow-up questions in two truths and a lie. This is tough.
I'm going to break your streak.
So your normal background when you jump on a Zoom call with you is Burning Man. I'm trying to rack my brain. on when that would have been. I'm going to say that one's the lie, Burning Man.
The Burning Man, yeah, the original Burning Man, I was like 2 years old or something. So
okay, I was going to say that's much longer. Okay.
James, you're good at this. Very good at this, because I was fooled.
I was going to make you guess first.
The first one. No, yeah, that's good. So
cool. Well, I was going to make you guess first, but I didn't want to tarnish my 100% record.
Don't take the easy way.
This is a challenge to all the future guests out there. You got to bring the heat for me, because I'm 100% so far. Well, cool. This has been so much fun. I'm glad to have the two perspectives after the acquisition. That's kind of cool. Any parting words before we hang up?
I would just say I love what you're doing, and I have binged you since I'm good at binging. So I got off of Netflix. I've binge watched, and really appreciate that you have such an open forum with these great perspectives. So I'm learning a lot.
I'm learning a lot too. Yeah. It's super fun.
Yeah, I know it's great that you've put the effort into this stuff, and the industry's got to change. There's obviously a place for the big guys, but it's a space that's just going to transform so much over the next decade. And there's a lot of room for a lot of players to advance the cause.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I'm really impressed that with your youth that you're doing this, because there's many of these kind of podcasts that's kind of like, the older generation looking down and going, how are we going to get, but I love that you bring a fresh perspective, that you haven't, aren't from the crew that's been at it 20, 30 years. So that's fantastic to see.
I just had a birthday and I'm feeling very sensitive about it, and you just made me feel younger. So
okay, good. But you are. It's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you two again, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. All right, friends, thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Podcast. For more episodes like this, and to get the weekly Nexus newsletter, which, by the way, readers have said is the best way to stay up to date on the future of the smart buildings industry, please subscribe at nexuslabs.online. You can find the show notes for this conversation there as well. Have a great day.